Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede, and we begin with an update on the criminal investigation into Hope, Florida, and an important question that needs to be asked. Is Florida Attorney General James Uthmeier trying to hide the grand jury report into the scandal? You'll hear his non-answer in a moment, but before we get there, a quick reminder about what's been happening. Last year, a grand jury was impaneled in Leon County to investigate possible criminal wrongdoing after the DeSantis administration secretly diverted $10 million from a Medicaid settlement into the Hope Florida Foundation. That was taxpayer money that eventually ended up in a political action committee controlled by Uthmeier and used as part of the governor's campaign against the marijuana amendment in 2024. At the time that money was diverted, Uthmeier was DeSantis' chief of staff. But since then, DeSantis appointed Uthmeier to be the state's attorney general, and as a result, Uthmeier is facing the voters for the very first time this November. It appears the grand jury probe wrapped up earlier this year, and normally the grand jury's findings will be made public so that we could all understand what actually happened. But the report hasn't been released, leaving some to wonder if some of the people named in the report, like Uthmeier, have secretly petitioned the court in Tallahassee to keep the report locked away so that no one can ever see it. So this week, when Uthmeier was in Miami for a press conference, he was asked if he petitioned the court to keep the findings secret, and this is how he answered.
I don't think anybody cares about this topic any more than the liberal media. There was a grand jury proceeding under Florida law. The contents thereof are confidential. That's not my choice. That is Florida law. What I can tell you is I have not been indicted. I've not been a suspect or a target. I've not been involved in any criminal activity. Nobody did anything wrong here. I think you had I think what I said in the past is a nothing burger complaint that's been politically motivated. At the end of the day, there's nothing there. I think that's been made pretty clear. And if you have any other specific questions, you'll have to go to the state attorney there. I will say Leon County is kind of like Washington, D.C. If there's any hint, any remote sense of criminal activity, like they'll indict a ham sandwich. So that hasn't happened. I think that tells you all you need to know. The media is the only one still talking about this.
If you notice, he didn't actually answer the question. And when a reporter asked again if he was okay with the grand jury report being made public, he attacked the reporter who asked the question. It's starting to seem like our attorney general might have something to hide. But even if he doesn't, the idea that nobody cares about how $10 million of taxpayer money was used as part of a dark money campaign to influence an election, well, that's amazing in and of itself. Now, I sent Uthmeier a text to see if he would like to answer the question directly or even come on the show to clear up the controversy, but he didn't respond. I did speak to the man who is running against Uthmeier this fall, former State Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez, and you'll hear that in a few moments. But first, I spoke to the two reporters who exposed the Hope, Florida scandal, Lawrence Bauer of the Tampa Bay Times and Alexandra Glorioso of the Miami Herald.
Well, what we think is that the grand jury has chosen not to indict someone, and instead they've chosen to issue a presentment, which is basically a report of the grand jury's findings. It's fairly rare, but it's used in instances where, well, we don't really want to indict someone, but we've found wrongdoing here that we think the public needs to know about. These reports can often have, like recommendations. It'll provide far more details about their investigation than an indictment would. And so we think that report has been issued, and that started a 15-day clock under state law that says, basically people named in it have a chance to ask a judge to repress or basically redact parts or all of that report.
Do we have any idea for when that 15-day clock would have started, or we don't actually even know that at this point?
We don't know exactly when that was, but
we started hearing about it in late January and in early February. I believe it was on February 4th. We asked Attorney General James Uthmeier in the Florida Capitol whether he had seen the report, when he had received the presentment, I think is specifically what we asked. And he didn't deny it at that point. He said at that time, I'm not sure what I can say, and you'll need to direct your questions to the state attorney's office.
One thing I will say is, Lawrence, you said that it's unusual to issue these reports. I will tell you, in Miami-Dade County, that's something the state attorney's office has done often, is avoid criminally charging someone, but then trying to issue lengthy reports to try to affect change going forward, so that the mistakes of the past aren't repeated and the system works better. We've seen that a number of times in Miami, but the purpose of it only works if that report is made public. It only works if the people who are in positions of power see the report and then act on it, the recommendations that are included in it. So it would seem self-defeating for the court or for the grand jury process to be inhibited by either the Attorney General or anyone else if they have, in fact, blocked this report from coming out.
Yeah, and to your point, Jim, it's very unusual for these reports to be redacted for that reason. The cases that we reviewed and the legal opinions that we reviewed on these grand jury presentments really favor releasing these reports because these are not coming usually with charges. They're not coming usually with indictments. It's a public citizenry process. And the judges have given the citizens who participate in these reports great latitude in what they're able to criticize regarding public officials and public entities.
Obviously, you saw how the Attorney General responded to all this, basically dismissing the notion that anyone still cares about what happened to Hope, Florida. But again, this is $10 million in taxpayer money that was routed away from the state coffers and into these political action committees ultimately. That is something I think when the Attorney General starts saying that no one in the public cares about $10 million of taxpayer money being siphoned away from taxpayer benefit, I think that's troubling in and of itself. What was your reaction to listening to Uthmeier the other day?
Well, basically that's kind of what he's going to say. The idea that no one cares about it. I mean, the legislature definitely cares. They changed state law last year to say you can't do this anymore. There's a number of top Republicans and people in this state who are extremely aware of what happened and really want to know more. They want to get to the bottom of this. The Attorney General has never answered questions about what exactly was his role in this whole thing. He appears to have been involved from literally the very beginning of the Centene settlement, and also, his political committee was obviously the one getting most of that $10 million. So there are serious questions here. Who was involved? Who did what? What did he do? That I think a lot of people want to know. And of course, at this point, this is an election issue. He's up for election this year. And this report, a lot of people think, should be released in time for that election.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, the Attorney General has never been elected to his position. He was the governor's chief of staff. So the governor appointed him to the Attorney General position after Ashley Moody vacated office to run for the Senate. And he's never faced public questions about this until now, and this is the first time that he's going to be on the ballot. So the fact that this report could be kept secret until after the election is of great public importance and concern.
You both wrote recently that regardless of what the grand jury may have done, that there is still the potential of the Internal Revenue Service, the federal IRS, taking some interest in all of this when Hope, Florida is required to file their tax returns at some point this year. Talk to me a little bit about that. What do you think is the concerning element of their tax filing and what that could portend for the group?
So there are two concerns about the tax filing. For one thing, this is going to be the first time on their 990 that they will have accounted for the $10 million and how it was spent. And IRS auditors could potentially look at whether that money was spent either as lobbying or as politics. A charity like the Hope Florida Foundation can spend a limited amount of money on lobbying, but if the IRS determines that $10 million or even most of it was spent on lobbying, such as against the ballot initiatives, which is what they would consider lobbying, then it's likely to be too excessive to meet IRS rules because it is by far the most money that the charity has ever spent. And some of the money appears to have gone to the Republican Party of Florida, or even potentially the governor's own personal political committee, the Florida Freedom Fund. And in that case, if any of that money ended up being spent on a candidate, that would be considered political spending, and that is outright banned under the IRS rules for a 501c3 charity like the Hope Florida Foundation.
I mean, yeah, some of this money might have actually ended up in Uthmeier's own political account. If you trace the money, the Chamber of Commerce's organization got $5 million from the Hope Florida Foundation. They gave $3.75 million of that money to Uthmeier's committee. And the rest of it, the remaining 1.25, we don't really know where it went. However, on the same day they were transferring money to Uthmeier's committee, they also transferred $1 million to their own network of political committees throughout the state. Those political committees then gave to RPOF, they gave to Uthmeier's, it's like personal political committee, that is his fundraising committee, not the one we're talking about here, and other political candidates. So the basic issue here is that nobody's ever said exactly what this $10 million was spent on, and the IRS potentially could find out.